just let me get my stuff together. Thank you, Sandy, for that wonderful introduction and for inviting me to speak. So, as you heard, I'm Brad Palmer, and I'm the author of an upcoming book, or two, and I have ASD, or Autism Spectrum Disorder. I'm actually high-functioning autistic, which is also known as Asperger's, which is a condition characterized by qualitative impairment in social interaction. It's by stereotyping and strict patterns of activities and interests, and with no clinically significant delay in cognitive development or general delay in language, which means, basically, in conversation I can come off as kind of weird, kind of awkward. I talk about certain things a lot, and I bring them up over and over again, but I'm not stupid or special. I've been asked to speak here about risk from my unique perspective. See, as you heard from Sandy, I wasn't diagnosed with ASD until today. Today?
Just recently.
Just recently, this year. But my older brother was when he was a child, and I have a younger brother who doesn't have any spectrum disorder. So I actually have three different perspectives on what it's like to be an ASD kid in the same generation. Added to that, I have my parents who had to raise us, and the challenges that posed, and the wisdom gleaned from that. And my brother, my older brother, is the father of five, and his oldest has ASD as well. And one of his others has SPD, which is sensory processing disorder. So just within my family, I have a lot of different perspectives around ASD. I also have experience with anxiety and depression, as does my brother. My sister-in-law has bipolar disorder, and my best friend growing up had ADHD. So I know a lot about mental conditions that are related to ASD. But I should stress that I'm not a psychologist at all. Everything I'm talking about is from my perspective, and from the perspective of those close to me. The subject of today, as I'm sure you're all aware, is risk. But what is meant by risk anyway? If you Google it, you get a definition of a situation involving exposure to danger, which is the possibility of suffering harm or injury. From this, it might be a bit odd to be talking about psychosocial conditions like ASD instead of, say, narcolepsy with its obvious risks. But it's the subtle problems of ASD that are important to talk about, because ignorance of risk increases the likelihood of harm. But not only that, knowing your risks helps you capitalize on them in some astonishing ways. In this talk, I'm going to talk about anxiety and depression, but I'm going to focus mostly on the environmental risks and social interaction risks related to autism spectrum disorder, because that's what I know. So, social risk. Social risk is very key to human experience. We actually have a specific word for social risk that defines it as different to other kinds. Trust. Trust is something that all humans have a need for and have inherent in their personality. They have ways of thinking. And you when we, give me 1 second, my mind is racing and my eyes are not. Sorry. Thank you. The word trust separates social risk from other kinds, but there is overlap, because you can trust an old car not to die before the next petrol station, but you wouldn't classify the guy who sold you the car as risky. His deal, yes, but not him himself. Forgot about the clicker for a second there. Over the millennia of physical and social evolution, humans have developed a number of tells, or social cues, to determine the trustworthiness of any given person or situation. Unfortunately, people with ASD don't really understand social cues, which is what makes it so risky to engage in social interaction for an ASD person. Take my nephew, for example. He's 11, and he's very friendly and talkative. So much so you actually have to watch him when you go out in public, because he'll start chatting to a random stranger, and will just keep going even as they try and escape. He doesn't understand that they're concerned or distressed that some random kid has started talking to him about Minecraft. And he doesn't even realize that it's particularly risky behavior. I mean, it's been explained to him, but it hasn't really penetrated, though he has slowed down and not done it as much. And that's a general example, but it does apply more specifically to. You'll remember that I said just before that I come off as weird, right? That's actually because of this. I sometimes struggle to realize when I approach a topic that people find uncomfortable, or that I've started looping a conversation back to a specific interest of mine over and over again. I find controversial topics quite fascinating because it's like a mental exercise to gather information, weigh both sides, or however many sides there are, and come to a logical or a moral conclusion. But most people, I've noticed, don't really do that. They try and switch the topic and get kind of uneasy. I do have a few ideas as to where the difference in comfort comes from, but I don't really have time to dive into that rabbit hole today. Unless you have nowhere to be for the next week. I'm not sure how common it is, but some people with ASD actually struggle with empathy. Now, it's not the same thing as psychopathy or callousness. I mean, generally autistic people would prefer to be more empathetic, to be able to understand. It's more like, instead of being able to feel as other people feel, they have to rationalize. So it's a lot harder and a lot more secondary. Like logically applying the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It doesn't always work as well, because my understanding of empathy is you build a social construct of another person in your mind and apply situations to that construct before engaging with the person. It might be that some ASD people are incapable of doing this, and it might take conscious effort to consider how other people will react to certain things they've said, which makes it exhausting and difficult. And if you get caught off guard, they're more likely to say something rude or mean without realizing it is. So, how about a break from my voice for just a minute? Here's a clip from one of my favorite movies, Guardians of the Galaxy. It's the character of Drax, the shirtless guy. Okay, that's it's not the wrong clip, it's just it wasn't playing.
Yeah, yeah. I get that.
You have to stop rolling.
Drax is the shirtless guy, you'll see in a bit. He's not technically autistic, but he does show some of the traits, and it's a good example of how it can appear in conversation.
I apologise, there may be an ad here.
Have to stop loading.
How? I have a plan. You've got a plan. Yes. First of all, you're copying me when I said I had a plan. I'm not. People say that all the time. It's not that you think of a thing to say. Secondly, I don't even believe you have a plan. I have part of a plan. What percentage of a plan do you have?
You don't get to ask questions after the nonsense you pulled on nowhere.
I just saved Quill. We've already established that you destroying the ship that I'm on is not saving me. When did we establish? Like 3 seconds ago. She's right. You don't get an opinion. What percentage? I don't know. 12%. 12%? It's real. Totally fake. That is the most real, authentic, hysterical laugh of my entire life because that is not a plan. You're taking their side? I am Groot. So what is better than 11%? What the hell does that have to do with anything? Thank you, Groot. Thank you. See? Groot's the only one of you who has a clue.
That's okay, I'll give you back to where we're supposed to be.
I put that in there for a couple of reasons. One, I really love the scene. And two, it shows that people with autism tend to show up when talking. They have certain noticeable traits. It's not as obvious as, say, Rain Man, but still very noticeable. It's not good or bad, but if you do notice these things, it allows you to modify how you interact with them to engage better. Naturally, there are some drawbacks to not understanding social cues very well. You tend to have a harder time making friends because nice, friendly people tend to get a bit overwhelmed by nice, friendly people who have no filter at all. So very few people stick around for any particularly long length of time. Those that do are either the best of people or the worst. People on the spectrum tend to make an easier target for shady actors and con artists because they're looking to exploit our openness. And we'll speak about naivete in a bit, but con artists and shady actors tend to have tails for their agendas. But so we aren't easy then to pick it up. It also applies to toxic people in relationships. We don't really pick up red flags. So when engaging in romance with people, we're less likely to notice when someone's doing things that are inappropriate or dangerous or indicators of deeper problems. And it applies the other way as well. We don't realize when we are doing things inappropriate or are being toxic. It needs to be explained very carefully to us for us to actually understand and actually do anything about it. Sometimes being a toxic person can cause people to just avoid you, to ignore you or just leave you alone. And this can happen without any malicious intent on our part. When enough people do that, you can start to feel pretty isolated, pretty separated from the world. And it makes it really hard to reach out and try and connect. Again, for me, this comes from a fear of rejection. Fear of losing those I currently have in my life. I'm going to stand over here because it's a lot easier for me to see when I don't have lights in my face. I don't want to risk dropping that. Logically, I know that I have enough. Thank you. Logically, I know that I'm sufficiently skilled at social interaction to not drive people away. But as it's happened in the past, where I've lost friends and pushed people away for lengths of time, it's a fear that's ever present in my mind. It doesn't. The skills I've acquired don't actually come naturally to me. They're second nature by this point, but they took conscious effort to develop. But I'm lucky that I managed to develop them. Not all autistic people do. And so their fear of rejection is reinforced by the rejection that follows. And they end up in a cycle of loneliness. This can be compounded with frustrations from environmental factors and other stresses, which can lead anyone to the brink of meltdown or shutdown. Living on that edge for any length of time is torturous. But it's even worse when you're out in public and you have to try and hold on till you get to a place where you're not making a scene. It can also lead to feelings of guilt, especially if your life is otherwise pretty good. It's not uncommon for people to be ashamed of their issues. I'm sure we can all agree with that. Sometimes it's ourselves beating us up about our inadequacies. Sometimes it's other people. Usually it's a mix of both. Autistic people have a bit of a rough time in this regard because shame is a social cue. So it's a form of social modifier towards normative behaviour. It's basically a way of people stopping other people acting weird, in negatively weird. Yeah, what about autistic people have a problem because we don't get social cues, so we don't get shame, so we can pick up on people shaming us, but we won't know what we've done to cause that. It's hard to look back on a situation with guilt and see exactly where you went wrong and exactly what you should have done. It's worse to look back on a situation with guilt and have no clue what went wrong. I've actually had a few arguments with my girlfriend because of this. So we're talking with her, everything's gone fine, and then I'll explain something to her without checking if she already understands it. And that usually ends up with her annoyed that I'm a condescending a-hole. Now before you think that's a silly thing to fight about, most of the time the thing I'm explaining is actually a small correction to something she's said. Now if I don't correct her, it's going to bug me and I'm going to fixate on it. But if I do, it's incredibly rude. Luckily, she loves me enough to call me out on it immediately, usually in a joking manner, so I have a chance to realize what I've done. As such, I'm starting to learn, getting better at it. I'm still sometimes a condescending a-hole though. That's of course assuming that we notice that we're being shamed. Sometimes I actually have a memory of someone coming up to me and asking, "Hey, why is he mad at you?" That's a fantastic way of ruining a day when you find out you've annoyed someone without meaning to and without having any indication that it happened. Or rather, not picking up the indications. It's really hard to get through. And with all these things, it's hard to really notice the positives, the benefits of this condition. I mean, it can be hard to imagine, given all that there are benefits at all. But they exist, and I really wouldn't trade the relative ease of like neurotypical social understanding for some of the benefits I have. See, as a kid, most people wouldn't really befriend me. This was due not only to ASD, but also because I was very shy and anxious. And I'd scare people off with my intensity. I've said that those who stay can be the worst of people, but also the best. I have the best friends in the world. They want the best for me, and I want the best for them. Growing up, my best friend was a guy named Jasper. Jasper has ADHD and is the most annoying person in the world. He's also one of the best. He understood the way I would think, how it takes me a bit longer to process information. I don't think he understood it on a logical level. I think he just kind of intuited it, because when I'd overthink a subject, usually some controversial one where the answer isn't clear, I'd ask him about it, and that would start a hours-long debate regarding the topic at hand. And since he had ADHD, he'd have to keep switching from topic to topic to topic to topic to topic, because he couldn't stay on a topic for any particular length of time. And it takes me time to consider a topic, so I have to stay on a topic for a bit of time. So what he would do is, he would jump from topic to topic in sort of a loop, and would come round again to the original topic once I've had enough time to consider the position and reply. That's why it would take so long, because we'd have to go around and around. But we'd always get back to the topics at hand. And some of my favorite memories, my best memories in my life, have been in my early 20s, getting steadily more drunk, talking about more and more pedantic things. And I could say the same thing about all my friends. I have no doubt that despite the fact that I haven't spoken to them in a long while, they'd be there for me if I needed them. There's even a benefit to being accidentally rude or unnecessarily pedantic. See, I'm generally known as the guy you go to if you want some tidbit of information, some trivia, or some well thought out advice. Being the go-to guy for this sort of thing earns a level of respect among your peers, and is especially useful when there's, say, an executive coming to the office, or your supervisor is in need of a hand. In terms of social hierarchy, which is a topic that people go to uni to misunderstand, so I'm a bit ahead of the game in my misunderstanding. It gives you a sense of purpose within a group, cements your place, which can give you a very strong sense of belonging. there is another opportunity. There's another benefit, but it's not a benefit for a person with ASD, but rather for those who befriend them. If you're offended by something I've said or done, or you've been made uncomfortable, it's an opportunity for you to have a look at what's caused that discomfort and see if it's an appropriate reaction. Oftentimes, it absolutely is. I, as I've said, can be a condescending a-hole. You are perfectly justified in being annoyed by that. But having information about where you get uncomfortable allows you to look into why those things make you uncomfortable and maybe shore up your mental defenses against such things if they're brought up with other people. Overall, having ASD makes social interaction a greater risk, but has a greater reward. And luckily, there are a few ways in which you can lower the risk without compromising the reward, or even boosting it. It all comes down to just learning a few skills. Such skills can be learned from various sources. Parents can teach their kids from a young age, so long as they know what they have to teach, first and foremost. But not only what to teach, also how to teach it effectively and have it stick, and whether or not it's actually necessary. See, I got lucky. My parents didn't get me diagnosed as a kid because I didn't need that. I was capable of managing my sensory input and interacting with people to a acceptable degree without any need for any special help. My older brother used to have meltdowns that ended very violently. He would punch holes in walls. And so when they got him diagnosed and got him in some help with the special ed unit, he improved vastly. It was very beneficial for him. The earlier parents teach social interaction effectively, the more likely a kid with ASD is to make friends or hold down a job. You can also learn them from professionals, like Sandy, yeah, or psychologists who are educated in the field. They're good for teaching kids or adults, as I learned earlier when I had my skills honed by my interactions with Sandy. Professionals are also very good to answer the questions, the what, if, how questions that I brought up before. And it's probably a good idea if you have an autistic child to talk to a professional, because every autistic person is different. They're going to need different requirements. You can't just read a book and expect to have it work. Older kids with ASD and adults can learn through self-reflection by paying attention to other people and seeing how they interact with each other. And this is the method that I used mostly. I pay attention to my friends and my family, who was very supportive and understood that I needed to know certain things. I pay attention to my own feelings, and I pay attention to the reactions to my conversation, my words. I learned that observation and practice are fantastic tools. You should absolutely practice your social skills as much as you can, because people are messy. Their emotions don't fit within strict rules. So practice allows you to apply generalized ideas to real situations, which can be very varied. And you should absolutely use the resources that are available to you. For example, the special ed is there for you if you need it. Your parent, if your child needs help is out there if you look for it. But what are the social skills I'm referring to? Well, ones you might take for granted, like just understanding emotions. It took me a long time to determine to do this because like a smirk's just like a smile. Concentration looks like pain. So it can be very confusing. Add to that fact that people hide their feelings all the time, and you've just got a mess. It's really difficult when you think things through logically to make sense of emotions. So learning to understand the subtle differences in expression and body language is a good way of lowering your risks of offending people or hurting feelings. As a side note, as a side note, you can actually manifest an additional benefit from this learning to understand emotion. If you're really, really good at the techniques to do so, you can become fantastic at lie detection. I'm not great at it. Lies tend to leave me confused rather than suspicious, but sometimes I like pick them out. It takes a lot of time and practice to learn how to understand emotion by reading faces and body language. So I can't read it here. Can't teach it here, rather. But there are some techniques and tips that I can impart. For example, have an ally, have someone who understands your specific social difficulties with you to help confirm your judgments. Don't rely on them, but have them there to ask if you are confused about something. It's okay to take your time when you're trying to understand something, trying to work through things in your mind. It actually gives you an air of authority when you do so. I mean, because it makes you seem very considered. And makes you seem like you're actually actively listening, which you absolutely should be. Here's a clip of Dr. Jordan Peterson speaking on Q&A. The clip is actually much longer than I couldn't find a shortened version of this clip. But the first segment where he's talking shows off this trait quite well.
I'm not anti-feminist. I think the idea that the world would benefit from removing
Yeah, I'm sorry, we've got
both sexes
It's as bad as it goes.
as rapidly as possible is something that anyone in any sense should share, given the rarity of talent and the necessity for new life. I do stand by my original statement, though, that there's a brand of more radical feminism that insists that our culture is best characterized as an oppressive patriarchy, and
an appalling sociological doctrine, and I think it has very negative psychological effects. And they won't be limited to men, because if it's true that there's something toxic, let's say, about masculinity per se, what that will inevitably mean is that as women adopt more masculine roles, traditionally, what is that toxicity somehow going to go away?
But that's a
So
straw man, because no one says there's anything toxic about masculinity per se.
What do you mean no one says that? The term exists.
No,
How is that a straw man? But where did the term
it's
come
a
from?
phrase that's used about forms of masculinity that are harmful to men and women. It's not about masculinity per se. You must know that.
I read the American Psychological Association guidelines for the treatment of boys and men, and I know perfectly well that this is no straw man. And it's not only devoted towards what you might describe as the more aggressive ends of masculine behavior. It's aimed at masculinity in a much broader range of. There's a much broader range of accusations that are under the surface than that. And so I don't see in what way at all it's a straw.
Okay, I'm just going to pause that argument for a second. Go to Catherine McGregor. Catherine, I mean, you've lived on both sides of the gender fence.
Now, as you can see, while the topic was quite controversial, and I'm not going to get into it here, you could see him initially he would pause quite a bit and consider his words, and he'd also reword things when it wasn't going correctly. It made him seem very, very well considered. And you may or may not have noticed, I've been using it to great effect in this thing. So, practical examples.
You may have clicked past.
That's okay. I can click back.
That's where you are.
Yep. It also has the bonus effect of making you look like you know what you're on about.
Is it the right slide?
Yep.
Yeah, that's the right side.
Yeah,
Okay. Second tip is to go out and spend some time just people watching. And you should try and just pick out how people are feeling, how their body language suggests. Maybe you have some ideas of what certain body languages do. And so you go out, you sit at a cafe, have a cuppa or something, and just look at people and try and determine, are they happy or sad, angry maybe, or are they just kind of bored? Start very broad emotions so you don't get tangled in confusing subtleties. When you're pretty good at that, you get a bit more specific. Are they, I don't know, angry at being insulted, or are they just frustrated with something? Are they excited, or are they just kind of joyful? Are they grieving, or, disappointed? The more you do this sort of thing, the easier it is to apply it when you're engaging with people in person. Remember, you don't actually have to learn this stuff through jumping in feet first. You can learn it logically from things online, like there's plenty of YouTube channels on being more charismatic or picking up expressions and micro expressions. You don't have to do it online. Technically, you can go to coaches, trainers who can teach you how to pick these sort of things up. Sandy did that with me when we first met, because I was struggling with micro expressions. But of course, practice is always best, because, as I've said earlier, it applies what you've learned online or with professionals to real-world situations. I know that not everyone learns well online, doesn't learn well being told things or looking at books. So acting classes or drama classes are really fantastic. Not just for ASD people, but for anyone who wants to interact with people better. Because they can teach you what to look for from within you. When you are trying to express an emotion, you can pick out what you're doing, and then it makes you look for those things in other people. Unfortunately, they can be a bit pricey. The National Institute for Dramatic Arts has some courses on for both kids and adults that are a few $100s. So if you can afford it, it's well worth it. Another useful skill is conversation. I didn't go too deep into the struggle of fixation and conversation earlier, but if you want a practical demonstration, ask me about Dark Souls at lunch. Just a warning. A tip I found to be immensely useful in conversation is don't try to impress people, but try to be impressed by people. Everyone loves to be impressive, or love to be worthy of attention. Once again, practice, observation, and outside help are fantastic ways of honing this skill. In fact, practice, observation, and outside help are good for honing any skill. Like with reading emotion, you can do it in steps. Depending on where you work best, maybe you can start conversing through text with friends and family, people you trust. Or maybe writing letters, something like that. And then when you're comfortable with that, you step it up to verbal communication over the phone or something, and then when you're comfortable with that, you move to in person. Or if you can't do it in person, there are online resources. There's a website called omegle.com which groups you together with random strangers, and you can just chat with a random stranger on the internet over text. It's a very good website, but you do have to observe basic internet safety. Don't give out your name, don't give out your address, anything like that. No personal identifying details. Another good site is 7cups.com, which is sort of like Omegle, but instead of just random strangers, it's people who are signed up to listen to your struggles. It's like an online therapy. They're not trained therapists, they are just caring people. If you're feeling particularly empathetic and particularly skilled, you could sign up to be a listener, try and help other people with their problems. But I would recommend being pretty good at empathizing first. I'll just give a second in case you want to write those down. Okay, so another aspect of social risk is naivete, which is defined as a lack of wisdom, experience, or judgment. You see this in children or sheltered adults stepping for the first time into the real world. And technically that would apply to drunk people, but I wouldn't consider a placid person as naive. And being naive isn't a bad thing. It's something we associate with purity and innocence. It's just that lacking good judgment is an effective way to make bad decisions and have worse experiences. Autistic people have this in spades. Just as we take a bit longer to understand social cues and develop good social habits, we actually have a tendency to think of the world idealistically. For example, lying isn't our first thought. We're very honest. And as such, we tend to assume everyone is that way. But that doesn't just mean blatant lies like, oh no, I'm missing my leg. No, it's also subtle, little white lies, like, yeah, your hair looks great, or no, I'm feeling fine. Because of this, people with ASD can give the appearance of being rude by how direct they are, or emotionally fragile because they don't that they tend to explain that I'm not really feeling that great today when they're asked. It also means we take for granted the most charitable explanation for situations. See, generally people with ASD aren't stupid. We aren't ignorant. We know that there are possible situations that explanations for situations that are less on the level. But we're more likely to just assume that those aren't the case. Jesus. 6 minutes left. Okay.
Just keep going, you're doing great. You're doing good.
You're doing really well, mate.
For example, I was once approached by an old friend about Amway. See, I'd never heard of it before and was actually considering the possibilities of such a proposition before I was made to take a step back and have a look. See, I was thinking of contacting local corner stores to sell the products, you know, like any normal business. But then I was told I'd be paying retail price for the stuff I was supposed to sell. And even that didn't quite put me off. What put me off was my father has dealt with it before and explained that it doesn't get you rich. It doesn't make you any money. In fact, it's worse than gambling. Which it's outright evil in my mind. I'm actually not going to go on that. I don't have time. What was I? Naivete, right. It's more pronounced in children because you have the innocence of being a child plus the ASD. I mentioned earlier that my nephew has a problem with wandering off with people who will listen to him, and that's exactly because of this. He doesn't realize that there are reasons to be wary of people. Though the fact that nothing of note has occurred is actually a testament to the watchful eye of both his parents and also the general goodness of people. I had written, in the first draft of this, I had written a short rant about how people are generally good. I don't really think it's necessary here. But, suffice to say, Xander would do well for a bit more good judgment. I went through these without clicking. How about that? Or did I? I have been through several of these. They're more susceptible to bad actors, but they also have more controversial ideas, as I explained in the beginning, about why I find controversial ideas fascinating. We look at them through a logical lens. We don't have emotions attached to them usually. So we'll end up with, we might, if we have insufficient information, we might come up with something that's against the social norm, but makes logical sense given our information. I've gone over being accidentally rude. I can't believe I read this twice. Actually, I do have another story to tell. about being susceptible to bad actors. When I was 8, I didn't have a lot of close, consistent friends. I don't even remember who I would really hang out with at that age. But I do remember that I was friends with one of the bad kids. The reason I actually befriended him was because we shared a birthday. Kids have weird reasons for things. But this kid came from like a poor family. And so one weekend I was spending the day at his house. And we just went for a walk up to the main road. And we're feeling kind of hungry. And so he suggested the idea of just nicking some cupcakes from the bakery. Now, this is hard to say. I knew it was a bad idea, logically, but I assumed that since he was my friend, he wouldn't do something that would get me into trouble. And so, while he hung around the corner, I casually strolled over, grabbed the cupcakes and ran. Needless to say, I don't spend much time with him anymore. I didn't end up getting in any trouble for that, but I feel guilty about it to this day. And that is actually kind of lucky. I was 8 and stealing cupcakes. It wasn't like 12 and trying drugs, or 15 and stealing cars. It's an example of how a bad actor can cause someone with ASD to do something they regret. Sometimes, though, it's not actually a bad actor that's the problem. Sometimes we just misread a situation. Imagine a similar situation, but instead of a kid convincing me to take cupcakes, there's a sign above the cupcakes, the tray, this display of cupcakes that says free samples. There's also an empty tray there. I mean, I couldn't see that. Think, free samples, excellent, and just grab them and walk off. Innocent mistake. And if I was due to my age, it would have been easily forgiven at 8. But since autistic people tend to be naive into adulthood, misreading a situation can lead to significantly worse situations. Like in the workplace, you might be suffering inexcusable conditions placed on you by your boss, short deadlines, being dressed down in public, unreasonable hours, things like this. In a neurotypical person might see that situation and think, I should stand up to it. I should go to HR. I should just quit. If I was in that situation, I'd probably think, I am doing so badly. No one else is suffering. No one else is having to put in the same hours. No one else is getting dressed down. I would just put up with it and push myself through and push myself until I got to breaking point. And would end up having to quit due to not being able to just go to work anymore or having meltdowns constantly. I'd probably end up working myself into a breakdown, get fired, and then blame myself for my failure. All because I misread a bad situation. Another situation lots of people with ASD get into is wires crossed in social interaction. Especially with regard to romance and flirting. I'm not going to talk about the difficulties of flirting because I'm no expert in flirting. I'm lucky to have gotten my girlfriend. But instead, considering the nature of these interactions and how close they are, I'm going to talk about some of the pitfalls that you can fall into. Okay, so I didn't write a slide for this one. A trait ASD people have is to fixate on things. This can apply to people. If it's not a malicious thing, but if we develop an interest in a person, we can start trying to know them and learn them about them as much as possible, which can lead to obsessiveness and can appear to be almost like being a stalker. It's not intentional, and that's not usually. I'm not going to say no ASD person is ever a stalker. That's probably wrong, but it's not really common for that to be a case. It's not malicious. It's just misunderstanding combined with natural fixation. Situations like this need to be handled quite delicately, but directly. Most people don't want to tell someone directly to go away, leave me alone. They'd rather let them down easy. Can't do that with an ASD person, they won't understand. So, be direct. You don't have to be mean about it, but be direct. It's pretty cut and dry in that case, but when both parties like each other, it gets a bit messier. Because we don't read the subtle social cues very well, we might be a bit too flirty in certain situations. Might push a bit beyond what the other person is comfortable with because we don't realize, which can get us into some very sticky situations. More than one ASD person has been in cuffs because of being just inappropriate, because they didn't realize that it was inappropriate. I've been in a situation not quite that bad. I have made people uncomfortable with my forwardness. And with the observation that I've developed, that's not something I had happen since. It was a wake-up call. But are there any benefits to being naive? That's the question. Well, yes, of course there are. I explained one before, I didn't explain one before. I skipped that entirely. When you're naive, you're not going to judge someone on something as superficial as, say, race or gender. They are not good characteristics to understand somebody when there's personality to consider, there's ideas to consider. I mean, sometimes we're a bit flippant about it because it's such a laughable idea that it's worth joking about. But fundamentally, we're not going to judge people based on something so silly as that. Another good thing is it facilitates rapid learning because new ideas are judged objectively. Because it's a new idea. It's like, oh, that could be useful, as opposed to, but I was taught this. It's quite extraordinary how quickly a person with ASD can learn something, if it's something that interests them, or works within something that interests them. Like, for example, myself, I'm quite interested in video games, which led me to understand how to design them so that they're not bad video games. which led me to learn how to write stories, construct narratives, and now I'm writing a book. I mean, it's still easy to get caught up in new ideas, but that's the cost. That's the price you pay for having new ideas. It'd be easy to judge. In social settings, being naive can be endearing. If people understand it, it can be cute. It can be honest. People tend to like honest people. There you go, honesty. Applying these benefits to, say, the workplace, because that's where the most benefit comes from, you're not going to get in trouble for, well, you might get in trouble for being a bit flippant about it, but you're not going to be in trouble for discriminating against people. You're able to pick up new ideas, new structures, new routines fairly quickly. And you're able to examine problems objectively. You're not going to be considering it through the lens of your previous biases. So you're able to come to a conclusion and fix problems that other people are just stumped by. So, what are some techniques to not being taken advantage of? Well, you have to consider things like how long you've known them, or how well you know them. And it's important to pay attention to your own biases, because an ASD person is going to be biased towards thinking they've known them, they know them better than they do. Keep in mind, of course, that if it's too good to be true, yeah, it's too good to be true. You're likely to be buying dreams as opposed to anything solid. Always listen to your conscience. People have good hearts, but they're led astray when convinced of something that is against their conscience. That's also good advice for anyone, really. Your conscience knows what's right. Even if you don't really understand social cues, you know ways in which things are good or bad. Techniques in social situations to help alleviate problems. Once again, having an ally with you can help you not jump into other people's ideas really quickly. Practicing charisma and conversation, the social skills I talked about earlier, very useful things to have to avoid letting your naivete lead you astray. You always err on the side of caution, especially within flirting situations. If you're not sure whether to push forward, probably don't push forward. It would be better to have someone disappointed that you didn't flirt harder than to flirt hard with someone who didn't want it. Now, I'm going to talk about something which is more practical in my life, because I've always been good at understanding how the environment affects me. But not everyone is good at that. See, with autistic people, or people with sensory processing disorder, any of your senses can be overloaded, can be thrown for a loop. Okay, not there yet. be thrown for a loop. It doesn't take much to trigger these things either. Most people can understand how distressing an ambulance siren is when it goes past. Imagine that, but it's not an ambulance siren, it's the high-pitched buzz of a speaker that's on idle, or it's a flickering light, or it's a pattern that just doesn't look right. I've always noticed that for me, when a sense gets overloaded, it's not because it's loud, it's not because it's droning, it's not because it's continuous or something like that. It's because it's not correct by the way I see the world. For example, these lights here are stressing me out because there is one that's out in a circle. I've been struggling to keep looking down. But yeah, I'm not usually, visual things like that are one of my triggers, but it's usually sound that does it for me, and that's why I brought up the high-pitched buzz of a speaker on idle that always distracts me. In addition, things like sudden change, they're very, very difficult to deal with. We like routine. We're very good at routine. It plays well in our fixation. So when something changes suddenly, we don't know how to cope. Oh, thank you. Oh, that's very kind. I needed this. That's good. Yeah, sudden changes. Usually exhausting. You can get pleasant surprises like that. But it's exhausting, not just because we don't know how to cope. We then have to work at fixing new routines to deal with our new situation. Things like unexpected visitors, or losing a job, or an alarm going off while you're at the shops. All these things can just throw you into overload. Shifting in your routines is not very easy either. Maybe you work in an office and the printer breaks. So now you have to go to the printer on the third floor as opposed to the one on your floor. That is going to throw your entire day off every time you have to print something, which is going to add to the stress, which is already pretty high because you're at a job. I do have a video here.
Have you got much more in there, right?
What's that?
Have you got much more in there?
I'll wrap up the environmental stuff pretty quickly. I'll just skip the section on anxiety and depression.
He's throwing grass and loops in his coping. Because he's been
Doing a good job.
Because most people watching this are either on the spectrum.
Oh, I love the way this stuff is. Alright, yeah.
Or know somebody who is, I won't bore you with a drawn-out intro. I present to you my top 10 autism survival tips. Number 1, headphones and white noise. The autistic brain is more often than not chaotic. Imagine a small room, if you will, where the walls, floor, and ceiling are covered with TV screens. This room represents the autistic brain. Each TV screen represents a thought or a sensation that your brain is trying to process. At any time during the day, there can be 1 or 2 screens that light up, and then all of a sudden, something happens that causes them all to light up, with each screen communicating different information to you. This causes us to temporarily temporarily forget our normal functions, and we must wait a while until the number of metaphorical screens switch off. With headphones, preferably noise-canceling ones, this will help to lower the volume of those unnecessary screens. If those headphones are playing some form of white noise or music, it's like changing the channel on those TVs to something pleasant. By canceling out all of that unnecessary noise and information, you can focus on what is necessary and go about your day being much more productive. Number 2.
I love that analogy because it's perfect, and I also really enjoy this guy's channel. He's got a series called, no, I don't remember what it's called, Living with Autism or something. No, The Truth About Autism.
Do you want to continue this? Or?
No. Where he explains various problems in a very succinct and logical way. He has a fantastic podcast I listen to as well every Wednesday called The Differently Wired Podcast, where he and a psychologist trained in the field talk about various problems. I learned a lot watching this guy in the lead up to this talk, and I would recommend his channel to everyone. His name is Max Darrett, but I forgot to write that down. Now, some of the negatives of environment is of overload, sensory overload. It occurs when there are too many things happening, or things that are happening are incorrect, as I said before. And they can be compounded by other stresses. Maybe there's a fight going on, and that's making you anxious, or maybe you have a talk due the next day and have only half finished it. So it leads you to have things just hit you a lot harder, and you need to calm yourself down. But if you can't, that can lead to meltdown, which is, it's not a temper tantrum or a cry for attention. It's when we can't handle a situation and all our senses are just going crazy. It can last for hours. There won't be screaming through it all, but there will probably is going to include some. There's going to be some other traits about it as well. Not just screaming or whining, but sometimes crying, curling up in ball, self-harm. An experience that tends to, it has to run its course. By the way, you can't stop a meltdown, you have to let it go. An experience I've had where I've come close to meltdown has been at the club, because that's there. Everything at a club is designed to overload your senses. The music is so loud you can feel it. Everyone is close together. The air is hard to breathe and smells rank. Everyone is drunk. There's fights going on in different places. There's angry people. There's happy people. You can't understand everything. Lights are going everywhere. There's fog. It's just... Sorry.
You good, man?
Yeah, sorry. Thinking about it is hard. You can't deal in a situation like that very well unless you are prepared for it. But a meltdown isn't really the worst thing that can happen, because when you get overloaded, sometimes after a meltdown, you go into shutdown, which is, it's similar but not a depressive episode. And it can last for days. Your emotions, your senses, your memory basically shuts down. You basically can't do things. You can't memorize things you can eat. But most of the days you're going to spend lying down in a dark room. And yeah, as I said, it's not a depressive episode. It's not something that's sad. It's just that you can't handle the world yet. Memories, you need your time to recoup. Luckily, I have only had one shutdown once, and it lasted a couple hours. But I've heard of people having like several day long where they just don't know what's been happening. All they can remember is blackness. It's a scary thing, and you can't rush these sorts of things. But there are benefits to having environmental awareness. You end up very, very observant. Just watch me walk along when there's a magpie nearby. I'll be able to isolate it in a second. It helps us adopt routine quickly because it's like a force. It forces us to adopt routine because without it, we don't know how to control everything. If we can control our environment, we can control the negatives. Oh, I only had 2 for that. You can apply those benefits in multiple different ways. As I said, you can watch, when you're highly observant, you can pick out things that most people don't notice, find solutions to problems. If you adapt routine, you can be very efficient in your work. So then all you need is some techniques to prevent going into meltdown. As was said in the video, positive sensory input. Blocking out the sound and playing some white noise will help dull some of the sensations. Or sometimes it doesn't need to be auditory. You can have tactile things. I like to rub satin together. Or some people touch fingers. Last workshop, I actually came close to a meltdown because of the sudden change of being asked to dance. I know a few people were wondering about that. Well, that's what happened. I nearly went into meltdown. So what I did was I knew that I was going to, so I sat down. I put on my glasses, put on my hat to dull all the sensations. I put in my headphones and I let myself calm down. I gave myself time. It's important to know what helps you in these situations. You can't stop a meltdown, but you can help speed it along by doing things like distracting the person from what's causing them their sensory overload. For example, there are sensory bottles nowadays, which are like scintillating, colourful things like that pen. Fantastic distraction because it occupies your mind. Once again, sensory dampening, very useful in all these situations. And I know I said that isolation earlier was a risk, a negative aspect of this, but in a meltdown, you don't want to be seen. You don't want to be around things. You want to let it go so it's not embarrassing. Because the stress of being seen while having a meltdown is adding to the meltdown. So isolate yourself or get someone to isolate you. The most important factor, I didn't put this as a bullet point because it's so important. The most important factor in preventing overload and meltdowns and shutdown is willpower. Your ability to know how much you can take and also to build how much you can take by putting yourself into positions where you are forced to notice these things. For example, when I was in uni, I had, in my room there was a calendar, and on the front of the calendar was a chameleon that was all green, and its mouth was slightly open, and inside its mouth was bright red. That gash of red looked so bad and would make me really uncomfortable whenever I looked at it. So I would stare at it every night before I went to sleep. And now I can look at that without any problems. I exposed myself to it because it's necessary to do so to overcome things. Luckily, I didn't actually write slides for the anxiety and depression part, so I won't go over it. But if you do want to talk about those things, come talk to me when we have a break. I'm more than willing to discuss it. In conclusion, knowing social skills, learning social skills, counter the risks associated with social interaction. Preparation and understanding of, and introspection mitigate environmental risk. And the benefits of these risks are well worth taking them. They're well worth it, as long as you consider it. Thank you.
That was awesome.
Thank you. I did not expect it to last.
That's all right, mate. It goes like that sometimes. How good was that? Did everybody get something out of that?
Yep.
I learned so much in that last hour and a bit. That was just fantastic, Bradley. Thanks so much. One thing that Bradley just skimmed over is that he's writing a book. Well, the book I know about. I got the opportunity to read the synopsis of the book before it was even really fleshed out. And I couldn't put the synopsis down, right? It just had me, and I was just glued to it. I just wanted to find out what was going on. And pretty much what Bradley's doing in this book is he is spelling out a lot of these circumstances in a story. And in some respects, correct me if I'm wrong, Bradley, but it's sort of the way you've got the scenes set too. It's almost like shifting through a game.
Yes.
Like level to level, although the levels are interactive in that they kind of refer forward and refer back, and it's like you've got to solve things, and that's kind of why I couldn't put it down, because I was trying to figure out where it was going. It just had me hooked. I perhaps muted a bit of a deadline in the program, which we hadn't actually talked about. You don't have to stick to that. I just want to say that publicly, all right? But if you guys are interested, I found the synopsis so engaging that I can highly recommend what the end result's going to be. I think it's going to be pretty fantastic, actually. So if you guys are interested, talk to Bradley about it. We've put his email address in there. You can send him an email and show you an expression of interest. But yeah, look, well done. I didn't realise how much pressure we were actually putting you under to be here, and you just carried that off so well, mate. You did a fantastic job. So.
Is that your first time? Yes.
That-
Congratulations. That's
All right, we're running a little over time right now, but we're going to have a break. I want to do 15 minutes because I think everybody needs to shake it out a bit and have a bit of a think. And if you want to shoot down and grab a coffee, do it immediately because I know how slow they are down there. And we want to get going with Fiona and Birgitta. I was just making sure I had the names said correctly. All right, I've got a little bit of setting up to do, so we'll be back here in 15 minutes. I don't even know what the time is.